Welcome back to Talking Point. Now, the one story that is, of course, dominating the entire day is that of President Donald Trump officially beginning the tariff hikes, targeting almost all countries that the U.S. trades with, taking a sledgehammer to Washington's long-standing advocacy of free trade and globalization. Trump's latest tariff, which builds on a series of similar steps he has taken since returning to the Oval Office on January the 20th, are hitting countries with which Washington has large trade deficits or that impose heavy tariffs on U.S. goods. 2 years ago, the U.S. imports were worth 1.1 trillion U.S. dollars more than its exports. No other country has a large trade deficit as the U.S. Now, China had been slapped with a 104% tariff by Trump, but they have countered in the last few hours by making it 84%. In fact, telling the U.S. President's Liberation Day announcement that China will go ahead and retaliate with regards to tariffs. Now, joining me now from Berlin in Germany, I'd like to welcome Professor Veit Etzold, who is a renowned economist, storytelling expert, best-selling author, and a professor of neuromarketing. Professor, thank you so much for joining us here on Talking Point on Hilaal TV. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Fahraaz Patel. Thank you very much.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Right. Professor, I mean, is this just simply Donald Trump being a capitalist and not really taking an interest in the country? I ask this because, of course, you wrote something saying the Donald Trump capitalist really is a far away step from the actual statesman that he is. Talk to us about that.
Yes, and he should behave more like a capitalist, which he doesn't do, because the US was always, let's say, the shining beacon of free markets. And right now, what he's doing, he is, as a capitalist would do it, they would say, okay, I have a counterpart. I want to do deals with people. And if I scare off all these people I want to do deals with, then that's counterproductive also for my capitalist business. So I think he's not even capitalist. He wants to somehow in a very aggressive way say, okay, America first. But that's also what JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon said, who is now very critical of this politics with the tariffs. He said, America first is fine, but America alone is dangerous. And currently, he is waging a trade war against the rest of the world. And I mean, I'm from Germany, and Germany in the Second World War and also in the First World War, they waged war against everyone and they lost. So if you wage war against everybody, be it a real war or a trade war, you can only lose. And actually, Donald Trump, I think, is very much tarnishing, diminishing the very successful brand of America as the center of free markets, global capitalism, and also innovation and also liability. So I think even as a capitalist, he's not doing it properly.
Professor, I want to touch on these actual tariffs because, I mean, it's hit countries where there's this uninhabited island where there are penguins at this moment. And no, I'm not talking about Danny DeVito or Colin Farrell. I'm talking about actual island where there are penguins there. This thinking of tariffs, I mean, this has happened before with previous US presidents. Why does it seem with Donald Trump that this is going to be quite a larger scale? I want to look here in South Africa, for example. So he's hit us with 30% tariffs, and this is, of course, a discounted one. Talk to us about the thinking of Trump in itself, separating from other US presidents who themselves have raised tariffs, but they've made sure that diplomacy and advocacy has been kept from a United States perspective.
Yes, if you look at other presidents, you're completely right. There have been tariffs before. I think these are the highest tariff increases since 1911. So more than 100 years ago, we had a similar situation. And I think, as you said, other presidents like Roosevelt or whoever, they did consult their allies and their trading partners before doing such a thing. What Donald Trump did, he did it out of the blue. I mean, he somehow warned that he would do it. But I think what he really wants to do, he wants to reduce taxes in the US in a very significant level. And to make sure there's money flowing in, he wants to use tariffs. But I mean, everybody knows that tariffs in the end make it more expensive to everybody. And finally, it's like the value added tax. This is not paid by the companies. It will be paid by the consumers. And these will be the consumers in America, the Johnny Sixpack in Iowa, who have voted for Trump. What is happening to them? They have to pay more for their products. So inflation is going up. And also they will have their 401k plans and their deposits with shares in it will be diminished by 20, 30%. So they pay more money for their goods and they lose more money in their savings. So it's not a real liberation day. It's a day where Donald Trump is liberating Americans from their money.
Prof, you talk of Johnny Sixpack. I beg your pardon. I read your article, and it's quite interesting because here's a part of the United States of America where there's predominantly your blue-collar workers. As we look at it right now, the United States of America's economy, even though they are the largest in the world, it is having some of its challenges. There's still trying to be some sort of recovery from the COVID pandemic. How is this part of the United States looking at Donald Trump right now? Of course, he sang the right songs from a political perspective. Yeah. It has everything, of course, of a national landmark or a national hallmark in that perspective. But from an economic one, is there really a sense of pure out-and-out education with regards to the tariffs? Because it may not hit them now, but in the long run, as you say, this is going to liberate them away from money.
Yes, I mean, right now I'm sitting in Berlin, and as I wrote in the article as well, there's a similar thing. What you can do in the real estate market, you put a brake on the rent you can charge as a landlord, but the problem is you will not put the brake on the cost for renting something. You put the brake on the construction activity itself. Gregory Mankiw, the former economic advisor of George W. Bush, said rent tariffs. Rent blockers, they are the second best way to destroy a city. The best way is bombing. And I think also with tariffs are the second best way to destroy an economy. The best one would be war. So what I think is that Donald Trump, as it looks, does not have this sort of economic education to see the impact that everybody is paying more than before. And I'm very surprised about this because Donald Trump, normally he's a real estate guy. He should know how interest payments work, how inflation works, how yields work. And I think he made a very good story for the blue collar guys who were really not satisfied with the Democrats, with Joe Biden and everything, and also not with Kamala Harris, because they did not see that they cared for their problems. Donald Trump makes it clear that he understands the problems of blue collar America, but now he's creating lots of problems for blue collar America, which nobody in this way expected. And I think this is really alienating him from his blue collar voters. And of course, now, as you can see, it's also alienating him from Wall Street with, for example, Bill Ackman or Jamie Dimon and Goldman Sachs all criticizing these tariffs because they say if something creates one of the biggest crashes on the stock exchange since COVID and volatility is going up since the financial crisis, this cannot be good for the economy. And I have to agree, unfortunately.
Well, what's not good right now, Professor, is at this very moment, and I'm going to talk from a South African perspective, the rand is trading at close to 20 rand to the dollar. We, of course, seen oil taking quite a deep dive. It's moving closer towards below the $60 per barrel mark. We've seen Asian markets really taking quite a huge hit, especially the Nikkei. And I'm going to touch on Europe after this break. Are we close to being to a recession just by this liberation, quote unquote, Liberation Day statement? Because right in South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa is trying to get envoys to try and ratify AGOA, which is, of course, an agreement between the African countries and the United States of America. But is the US, is Donald Trump and this current administration understanding the depth of the crisis that they have created from a global economic standpoint?
I don't think so, to be honest. I think if he would, because actually he's also counterproductive to his own goals. I mean, you also know that the BRICS countries, for example, they want to do their own currency. They want to get rid of the dollar. Well, now the dollar was the currency of the world. It was the standard where all the banking transactions took place. That was, of course, also power for America, because wherever there was a dollar transaction, there was an American bank involved. And so you could put on sanctions on other countries you did not like. You could deny listings on American stock exchanges and so on. And if now the US is non-predictable, is acting in a very running amok and cannot be trusted, I think that's really fueling demands for an alternative currency, like the BRICS are doing this, like China wants to do this. And I think this is some second order effect he has not in mind. So basically, he is destroying the things he wants to, let's say, keep, like a strong economy, like a dollar as the world currency, like the American stock exchange, and as the #1 place for listing stocks. And I fear, he is not thinking in these dimensions, otherwise he would not do it. Or maybe he thinks it's transitory, it will go away. He says you have to take the bitter medicine. But I would say a talk or a decision that creates such a crash on the stock exchange cannot be good. And normally a crash like this is foreboding a recession half a year or 1 year later. So I think basically you could very well expect that by one speech alone, Trump created a recession, which is completely counterproductive to what he said. He wants to increase the growth of the economy. He wants to reduce tax. He wants to bring in investments from other countries. Basically, it might be that the contrary will be happening. And that's very dialectic, as a philosopher would say.
Definitely. Well, after the break, we're going to be chatting European Union. What is their plan with regards to this? It's quite clear Donald Trump is even willing to risk alienating one of his, if not his most important trade partner. We'll continue this conversation after the break. Welcome back to Talking Point. I'm still in conversation with renowned economist and professor of neuromarketing, Professor Veit Etzold. Professor Etzold, thank you again for staying with us. Just reading some of the statements from the European Union earlier today. Look, they want to try and find some sort of solution. They want to try and find a way where they can curb these tariffs. They want to try and introduce tariffs of their own, but they are willing to consider this potential tariff war. How much of a shockwave did this cause amongst the European countries when Donald Trump had announced these tariff hikes on many, if not all, European nations?
I found out in discussions also here in the capital of Germany, which is the biggest economy in Europe, by far the biggest. I think most of the people are very surprised, but also, I mean, some of them expected this because Donald Trump already announced that he would do it. Now, the problem is for Europe, of course, they can hit back, and that's what Ursula von der Leyen said. We might hit back, or not Ursula von der Leyen, but Emmanuel Macron, for example, he says we have to hit back. Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the EU Commission, says we have to discuss and negotiate. And I think there is no other option for the EU, because the EU and also Germany, they are very dependent at the moment on America, on America's security guarantee with the troops in America, the threat of Russia, also the cooperation of secret services. There have been several terrorist attacks in Germany which have been prevented. Some of them happened, some have been prevented because of help from the US Secret Service, like the CIA, like the NSA, and so on, because here the European services are not that advanced. So the problem is Europe is relying a lot that Uncle Sam will help us. And so you can't play hardball with Uncle Sam and hit back as hard as they do it, as America is doing it, because Europe is still very much dependent on America, because they have slept through, let's say, 20 years not doing their homework on internal and external security. And I think that is now hitting back. So I think doing negotiations are the only way possible. Otherwise, I would say Europe is in even deeper trouble.
Here's the thing, Prof. Etzold, is that Ursula von der Leyen will try and use diplomacy statesmen like Emmanuel Macron may try to do the same also. But there's the unpredictability factor of Donald Trump that still stands. No one really knows what's going to happen. I mean, the fact that he could go ahead and put a tariff hike on this uninhabited island shows that it's difficult to understand what Donald Trump is going to do next. This is something, and I'm sure you can elaborate on it, the European Union doesn't want to go through having these discussions and then all of a sudden it reaches quite a dead end.
Yes, that could of course happen. I mean, what we saw about Trump is that he is I think sometimes he doesn't have a real strategy. Sometimes he's doing it in a tactical way. So you think today I'm doing this, tomorrow I'm doing that, and sometimes also changing his opinion. You also see this with renegotiating tariffs. So I think he's open for that if he's approached by the right person. That could be, for example, Prime Minister Meloni from Italy, whom he also invited to his inauguration in January, so the leader of Italy. So maybe it would be good to send people he likes, because what I heard of Donald Trump, and he was in the hotel business before, as you might know, and I once talked to a hotel manager who was employed by Donald Trump, running one of his hotels in Florida, and the guy said he's a guy who's very much doing relations on a personal level. So if he likes people, it's difficult for him to say no. So what I would really do is sending somebody who he really likes, like Silvia Meloni, for example, and try to do the negotiations for Europe to make it more benign. Another possibility could be, and there Trump, of course, has a point, Europe is also using tariffs, also on environmental standards, on data protection, and so on, which are sometimes much more severe than those in the US. And so a fair approach could be, hey, Mr. Trump, we are going to decrease tariffs to 0% if you do the same. And then it would be a good show for Europe to say, see, they really want to take it serious, and Trump has to take it serious as well. Otherwise, it's just, Mr. Trump, please reduce your tariffs, but we keep our standards for American products, which will not work. So I would also do my own homework if I were Europe, and I would send somebody who can connect to Donald Trump in a good way and not send someone he does not like in the first place.
Prof, I want to come back here to South Africa. So at the start of the year, Donald Trump, and of course there was a lot of political ramblings that were happening between South Africa and the United States. Of course, it stopped the HIV/AIDS funding that the United States through PEPFAR has been doing for quite a number of years. What had happened is that when that had occurred, the European Union had expressed its continuous support for the government here in South Africa. What had also happened a couple of weeks ago, and I'm sure you followed it quite well, was Ursula von der Leyen, the European Union Commissioner, had come to South Africa. And one of her words were, we want to maintain this relationship with Africa, specifically South Africa. How much is the European Union, if all the cards fall against this deal between the European Union and the United States, how much is the European Union going to look at the global South as quite a strategic ally from an economics perspective?
Well, I would say if they are smart, if the European Union is smart, they should look at the global South, because if you look at the history, I mean, you have this topic with colonies and everything, and this is also worked on a lot, and that has been a challenge in recent years. But there is a big connection also to the global South. I went to Namibia last year, and also in Tanzania, for example, also South Africa. A lot of people speak Dutch or speak German.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of admiration also for Europe. But what I see, and this is a problem, a strategic issue beyond Donald Trump, is that Europe is not really leveraging the possibilities of doing business, especially with Africa and the global South. This is something China is doing. I mean, if you look at Chinese investments in Africa, they are doing construction, they are doing motorways, they are doing railways, they are doing airports. And the Germany, they just sent some development aid, which trickles somewhere and reaches nobody. So I think Donald Trump is a wake-up call for Europe concerning liberating the economy. I mean, we have a recession in Germany since almost 2 years because the government was so bad. It should be a wake-up call to really foster innovation, a wake-up call to spend on defense, internal, external security, and also to look for the allies who have always been there but have been overlooked. Because when I talk to people on the African continent, everybody wants to do more business with Europe, especially also with Germany. Europe is completely overlooking this huge possibility. So hopefully this will be a further wake-up call to also foster collaboration with the global South. So a clear yes, they should do this, definitely.
After the break, China, the United States of America. This is how we'll wrap up the conversation for this talking point. What next? They've imposed 104% on Beijing. Beijing has said, well, we are going to give you 84%. How is this going to end up? We will have this conversation after the break. Welcome back. As the 104% tariff on Beijing was slapped today, China had decided that they were going to go from 34% to 84% against Washington. Professor Etzold, here's the thing, right? It's quite clear that China were going to retaliate because they have that power there. But when you have these two major economies going head to head, this is really going to be an interesting tariff war to watch, but also how this is going to affect the global perspective of things.
Definitely, it will affect the global perspective of things because these are the two superpowers. And if you talk about the US and China, there's often this phenomenon of Thucydides, I think is the right pronunciation. It's a Greek military strategist, and he said if there are two powers which are almost as strong, have a similar strength, then there will be war between those powers at one time. And I think here it will be a trade war, which is now really escalating. And I think the consequences for the rest of the world will also be not pleasant. I mean, you see this, for example, with Apple. We all know Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple. He was promoted to CEO because he built a perfect supply chain with the Apple products, which were sold for a very high price and produced for a low price in China. So margins were very high. And now the whole business model of Apple is currently falling apart because now Apple wants to source something from China to India, but India is also suffering on tariffs. So there are a lot of companies that are suffering from that, also American companies. And finally, also the consumer has to pay more, for example, for Apple products. And we also know that in Guangzhou, for example, in China, there's this big industrial landscape, the factory of the world, where everything is built and constructed, also stuff that is sold at Walmart markets. So I think if you choke this production machine voluntarily, I think this will make it very, very expensive for the whole world. It's not a war, but it's a trade war, and it will not only cause inflation in the US to rise, but also on a global level. And this combined with a recession, this is what economists call stagflation. You have a stagnation and you have inflation, and this is the worst that can happen. And unless these two alpha animals, let's say, Donald Trump and Xi Jinping, get themselves together, I think the consequences could affect the whole world in a very unpleasant way.
Professor Etzold, let's talk manufacturing from a Chinese perspective, production from a Chinese perspective. You've of course spoke about Apple. Apple sees China as a country where production margins would be much higher, but of course, the distribution of that might be much lower because the parts there may come at a cheaper price. Apple is an American company. It's an American conglomerate.
Yeah.
How do these top CEOs who want to use China as a base for their actual manufacturing and production now go ahead and turn against Donald Trump in a way where they're going to force his hand to try and either drop the tariff hike below 104%, or really have both Jinping and Trump sitting down and trying to find a way? Because at the end of it, there is a business dictating towards Donald Trump to try and make sure that the United States does not sink any further than it is right now.
Yes, I think this is also what's happening at the moment, so that CEOs approach Donald Trump in the US and say, we cannot do this. The other thing is, of course, that Xi Jinping, I mean, it's not a democracy. He's an autocrat. He is a strong man. And that's the system China is run by. So I'm not the guy telling China, oh, you have to be more democratic. I mean, that they aren't, and they don't want to be that. And the thing is also, Xi Jinping, he had a lot of trouble recently with the lower innovation and the stuff with Alibaba and Tencent and the billionaires he had to put into prison. Then there was this real estate bubble. Then there is not enough consumption. So right now, this is a good opportunity for Xi Jinping to show I can solve problems. So if there's no problem, you can invent one and then you solve it. And this problem is Donald Trump. And he shows, no, we are China. We are not bossed around by anybody, also not by the US. And we hit back with this 84% tariff. So I think Xi Jinping has to do this to be credible before his own country. And the Chinese population is a bit similar like Vladimir Putin. Mm-hmm. People often overlook that he has to look good for the Russian population, look strong for the Russian population. That's the same with Xi Jinping. That's also the same with Trump. He also wants to look as somebody who is doing something, changing something, implementing something. But the problem is right now he's implementing it in a way that's damaging America. But I think they should get themselves together. The other thing is what the rest of the world would do, and here we are with the global South again, which I would say also includes in part China, is to build relations to China, rebuild them, because Europe, in obeying America's distrust of China, they try to cut relationships to China, and I think this will come back. I mean, if you look at Germany, for example, there's huge interaction with the Chinese economy. And I think if Europe, for example, is fostering business with China, encouraging companies to do business with China, China is doing the same, they can, of course, bypass the tariffs because they are doing business between Europe and China, and the US is not involved at all. That could be a consequence, which I think would be doable and would be necessary to prevent less money for everybody.
I want to touch on the automotive industry, Prof, because here in South Africa, we have quite a large number of Chinese-made vehicles that is swarming the market, from Omoda to GWM to Chery, massive here in South Africa. But I want to touch on the electric cars, because BYD is now seen as a direct rival to Elon Musk's Tesla, and Elon Musk, well, he's quite as close an ally to Donald Trump as anyone could get. He's trying to get Tesla to make quite a huge impact within China, where electric cars is really starting to have quite a massive boom, if not a larger boom than many had expected. How do you see this turning out, where you've got Elon Musk who wants to go to China and make quite a huge impact with Tesla, but his president, the man that he sits with practically every day within the Oval Office, is not playing ball? This is going to be quite an interesting turn of events, isn't it, Prof?
It is definitely. And I think this will lead to let's say, call it divorce between Donald Trump and Elon Musk. Elon Musk already proposed that there should be free trade zones with close allies, which also includes Europe. And you also mentioned Tesla and China. I think what Elon Musk is seeing is that in Europe, there's a huge image problem of Tesla, because a lot of Europeans dislike Elon Musk's involvement in the Trump government. So people boycott and abolish Tesla, buying Tesla cars, or they put stickers on their car. I buy a Tesla, but not Elon Musk. So people are ashamed of having a Tesla. And if you look at China, I mean, there is not only an electric car, there are self-driving cars, there's everything connected. You mentioned BYD, which is named Build Your Dreams. So you have the car connected to your home devices. You have some sort of Chinese Alexa where you can command the car to get out of the garage and to heat up if it's cold, and everything works interconnected. And this is something which Tesla cannot deliver, which European car makers cannot deliver. And so I think another challenge is also that the Chinese electric automobile industry has already overtaken all its rivals, be it Tesla or be it the other ones. And I think this is something Elon Musk is very well aware of. And if you look at the share price of Tesla, it went up like hell after November. Now it goes down again. I think Elon Musk has lost, I think, maybe $100 billion. And I think in this case, he's a guy who also likes power, but he also is a guy who likes money. And I think money finally will win. If Donald Trump is doing too much damage to Tesla's business model, I think there will be a divorce between the two. And I think that's pretty likely to appear in the next days or weeks.
Prof, one final question. The world right now, there seems to be a lot of anxiety, uncertainty. Yeah. Nobody really knows what's going to happen here in South Africa. Of course, there's a deeper political aspect that we're dealing with. My previous guest before you, of course, I was speaking about it, of course, with the ruling coalition. South Africa, for the first time, having a ruling coalition. So some sort of disagreements between two of the biggest parties here. But from a global perspective, the talks of recession moves even closer to it happening. How does the world now move ahead to try and make sure, number one, the recession doesn't happen, but if it does happen, what is the next move? How much of an impact is the Global South now going to say, we now have to look at other options, and that other options is moving away from an uncertainty, unpredictability of Donald Trump and moving to what many would say stability and a sense of economic directionness when it comes to China and Xi Jinping?
Yes, I think Xi Jinping lately said that he is an advocate of free trade, and also the Global South wants free trade. I think it, as you might know, I'm also consulting companies on storytelling. This is one of the books, Effective, sure. I don't know if you see this here correctly, Effective Change Communication. There's the blurring, but anyway. So it's something I always see, that if you want change, if you want to position yourself in a good way, if you want to say we have to do it differently, you need a good story. You have to communicate what gets better if we do this, what gets worse if we don't do this. I think now is really the time for politicians, be it in the Global South or in Europe, to say to their population, to their citizens, okay, things might become hard, but now we have to get our things together, and we have to prove also to America that we can do it on our own. And the Global South, the story could be definitely, we can help the rest of the world by bypassing these tariffs. We can create new trade zones. And I think now is a really good opportunity to make this happen. It was discussed a long time, but there was never some sort of clear positioning. There was never some sort of clear story. And I think right now conditions are in a way that you have to do this. And so I think in a way, I'm even optimistic that this can be a wake-up call which will benefit the Global South and also Europe and China, and hopefully finally also the US, if they get their things together again, if they return to sanity. And so I'm actually more optimistic than pessimistic about the whole thing.
Prof, as always, we'd like to thank you so much for joining us here on Talking Point here on Hilaal TV. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much.
That's Professor Veit Etzold from Berlin, Germany, renowned economist, storytelling expert, best-selling author, and professor of neuromarketing. Well, it's going to be interesting how the world reacts if a recession does happen. We hope, Allah forbid, that is not going to be the case. But what Donald Trump has done has really caused shockwaves across the economy. It is going to be interesting that when he refers to it as take better medicine, well, it's not that simple, Mr. Trump. It's not that simple for the world to take better medicine. They are relying on their respective economies to make things better for their countries. These tariffs don't make it any easy. Yeah, in South Africa, 30%. South Africa, so of course, sending envoys to sort out political rumblings between Pretoria and Washington. But at this very moment, these tariff hikes, the shockwaves it has sent, the uncertainty it has sent, it's something the world doesn't need at this very moment. But we are where we are. And it's up to world leaders to make the right decisions and to make the decisions that are in favor of its citizens. Well, that's all we have for you here on Talking Point from myself, Fahraaz Patel, and the rest of the team in Johannesburg. We'll be back with News in Focus. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.